Hello and welcome to Book Chat. I'm Mandy Greaves, and today I'm chatting with Brendon Mannyx. Welcome, Brendon, and thanks for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thanks, Mandy. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Okay, now today Brendon and I are going to be chatting about a play that re-examines the plight and fate of one of the New Testament's most infamous characters, Judas Iscariot. However, before we chat about the play, Brendon, could you just explain to everyone a little bit about what you do here at the Diocese and maybe just a little bit about what's led you to this role?
Thank you. My role has the title Manager, Mission and Outreach, which when you think about it, covers a lot. So I am placed within Pastoral Ministries, and I work with the Pastoral Ministries team, and many people will be aware of the 5 foundations of church life that we have in our diocese, being identity and community, worship and prayer, formation and education, mission and outreach, and leadership and structure. So I take responsibility for the foundation, mission and outreach, and mission is at the heart of what we do as the diocese, and that mission to see the transformation of society for good. And that takes me into some wonderful places and working with diverse groups that really want to see good done in our community.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, now lots of people, when I talk to them in these book chats, say they don't have time to read, that family, the busyness of daily life and work makes it really difficult. Now you've got a large young family, you've just started in a new job with the diocese, as you said. How or why do you take time to read?
You're right, yes, we do have a big family. We have 6 children, and I have to say reading is one thing that all my kids are passionate about. And I think I think it's important as parents that we set the example of reading.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they picked that up from mum and dad. Quite often when the kids were young, I was often on the couch with a book, and they would just curl up in my lap and read one of their own. So look, the fact that the kids love reading too means they give us space to read in and around them when they're reading. And I often find if I've got lots to process, if I'm reading a good book, it keeps my mind going at such a pace that I can process everything else that's going on in life. So I actually find it helps me when I'm busy rather than gets in my way.
Okay, that's great. Excellent. So let's get into this intriguing choice. And it was, as I said at the start, it's a play. You're the first person to choose a play, which is really exciting. And it's a play I'd not heard of, and I'm ashamed to say I hadn't heard of the playwright, Stephen Greaves, either. So it's a play called The Last Days of Judas Iscariot. And Greaves has actually won a Pulitzer Prize for his plays. So can you tell me how you came upon this play and just give everyone a little bit of an overview of what it's about?
Okay, so I come from a theatre background.
Oh.
I studied theatre at university and worked as a drama teacher for many years. And in 2008, I was really fortunate to be employed for World Youth Day as the assistant director on the Stations of the Cross. Okay. And I was working with Father Franco Cavera. Father Franco is a priest, but his background was also in theatre. He was an opera director. Mm-hmm. and came from that space into the priesthood. And whilst we were working together, just sharing our histories, our love of theatre, and at that time working for the church and reconciling the working in theatre and bringing that into a church space and a faith space. And he put this play in my hands. Mm-hmm. He said, I've been reading this. It's called The Last Days of Judas Iscariot. You might find it interesting. And so I took it away, and from the opening monologue, I was hooked, and I read the whole book. Father Franco at that time was reading a companion text to it, which is called a Jesuit on Broadway, about a priest who was working with the cast and the crew to help give meaning to, their experience of what they were doing in bringing the play to life. So, it was quite a unique time in my own story. For anyone who saw the Stations of the Cross at World Youth Day, that was a huge undertaking. We had a cast of over 100 in that space. And here I am reading this text of others who were struggling, to put faith onto stage.
Right.
So yeah, it came at a very unique time in my own story.
Yep.
And the play itself really is, what I just sort of described there. It's, and I see it from the author's point of view, his own unique struggle to answer some of the more difficult questions of our faith.
Yes.
And to put that onto the stage. And the characters we meet in this play are all wrestling with, the nature of God, the nature of faith and life, and the things that have happened in my own story, and where is God in that story. So I think this play, for however it's constructed and whatever you see on the stage, it really is a way of wrestling with those questions.
Okay, good. Now, that leads me into when I was doing a bit of research about Geergis. One reviewer described him as, and I'll quote it, a playwright to be reckoned with, a fierce and questioning mind that refuses to settle for glib answers. So how does that sit with your view of the play? And how has Geergis presented his concept in a way that's interesting and insightful to someone who either reads it or goes along to see this play?
Yeah, and Geergis is not afraid to ask difficult questions.
No.
And I think, maybe the image of Jacob wrestling the angel is a good one. That Geergis doesn't want a simple answer to a difficult question. And I think he wants to challenge people of faith as well, and often we can try and give the answers that we've learnt by rote, or we learnt as a child, but haven't revisited in our adult years and reconciled with our experience of life and God and the world. And in order to do that, Geergis really knocks us off our center. We have some foul-mouthed saints coming onto the stage. We have some interesting characters of history who history may have painted in a particular way, and we're challenged to either sympathize with them. So if they were historically, despised characters, we're invited to see the goodness in them. And if they're historically good characters, we're invited to see, well, maybe they're not so perfect. And I think that's really, people are complicated. Yes. Life is complicated. And so there can't be simple answers. And to be honest, I don't think the questions are answered by the end of the play. I don't think you leave this play saying, now I get it. I think you leave this play saying...
with more questions.
But I think the big question you leave saying is, well, where am I?
Yeah. Which
after
a good place to be left.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit of an ordeal, the play. I'd say that. But it'll leave you in a place saying, well, what does this mean for me?
Yeah. Now, Judas Iscariot is largely defined by one act, and if you ask anyone what they know about Judas Iscariot, it's probably that one thing, that he betrayed Jesus for the 30 silver pieces. So how has reading this play changed or informed your opinion of Judas?
Yeah, and look, I grew up at a time when the musical Jesus Christ Superstar was popular. We've had, I think the character of Judas Iscariot has captured particularly works of fiction, captured the imagination. because he was a man who was friends with Jesus for 3 years, who lived with him, walked with him, was loved by him, and still he chose to betray him.
Mm-hmm.
What was it that Jesus saw in Judas that he wanted to call him friend? There had to be more to Judas than just that one act. And as I said, people are so complicated. And as I wrestle with that understanding, I start to wrestle with myself. Who am I who calls himself a friend of Jesus, and then I do the things that I do? Despite my wanting to love and be loved, I get it wrong and I fought. And so I think this play, rather than romanticizing the character of Judas, really invites us into that complex space of what it means to love someone and still be a cause of hurt and suffering for that person.
Yeah, okay. Now, as you mentioned before, the play introduces us to a lot of characters from history. It's set in a courtroom in downtown Purgatory, and it examines that struggle between our, like you were just saying, our ability, our free will to do what we want, and God's mercy for us. And often the testimony is funny, and it has witness, like we see people like Mother Teresa, Pontius Pilate, Sigmund Freud. So other than, apart from Judas Iscariot, is there another character that captured you? And, if you wrote a spin-off or you'd think, I'd really like to explore that person's story.
Yeah, there's one monologue in the play that hit me the very first time I read it. And sometimes I'll just pick up the book just to read that monologue. And it's the opening monologue, so there's not too many spoilers in this. It's not going to ruin the play. But the opening monologue is delivered by Henrietta Iscariot, the mother of Judas. And it's a mother who's just buried her son. And she had to bury her son on her own because none of his friends wanted to be there. Judas's brothers and sisters didn't want to be there. No one from the community wanted to help her, and she was left to dig the grave with her own 2 hands. And this powerful, heartbreaking sharing of this mother who loved her son, and is convinced that God loves her son, trying to reconcile everything the world around her was saying about her son. And it's moving.
It is.
Because you realize for every story, for every, let's say, evil act that happens in the world and the people who perpetrate them, there has been a mother who's loved them, or brought them into the world, held them as a baby. They're the stories we don't often hear.
No.
And that's how the playwright chose to begin the play, from that. And so, it wouldn't be just to hear Henrietta's story, but every mother who's seen their child on trial or seen their child condemned by society. How do they feel?
Yeah, and I agree with you. I really set the whole play up to, I think, try and make you a bit more sympathetic and understanding of that backstory, which quite often we're not. And in our society now, the media kind of fails to show that too. It's always a sensationalized act, but never, what happens to people behind the scenes. Yeah. So given that, I'm guessing the play has been impactful for you and is going to live with you and in your life. Yeah.
As you said, the whole story plays out as a courtroom drama. which I think for most movie watchers or people into TV, that whole courtroom drama is a genre that I think appeals to a lot of people, particularly too when you can fill the witness box with any person from history.
Yes.
So that in itself is quite striking and makes it memorable. But I think the thing that makes it most memorable for me, and here I'm going to be very careful with what I say, not to give away any spoilers, but there is one final scene between Jesus and Judas, which to this day I can't get out of my head.
Okay.
It's powerful. I think it's as close as Gerges comes to trying to give an answer,
Okay.
to reconcile God's love with our free will, and to help maybe understand some of those questions of heaven and hell and judgment.
Okay.
But as we said before, it's not done in a simple way.
No.
It's done in a very visceral, heartbreaking way that long after you forget the words, you don't forget the way you felt when you read or saw that scene for the first time.
Yeah. No, and I like, I haven't read it. I watched a version on YouTube like you suggested, and it wasn't the greatest rendition of the play, I'm sure, but like you say, it was still moving even at an amateurish kind of a level. So I can't imagine how powerful it would be in the hands of, like a great production company to see it. Yeah, I think it would be amazing.
And the interesting thing is, for a lot of the online versions of the play, has the audience really close to the action.
Yeah.
And I think that's a deliberate staging choice to really put you in, so you can't escape the discomfort that this play generates.
Well, I think it almost makes you part of the courtroom. Do you know what I mean? You're one of the people in the courtroom, and you're the one, witnessing this and having to make decisions about people. So I think, it would be amazing to be in an audience and see the play. Now, as you said, this play is nothing if not irreverent, and some people could find it disrespectful, could be really challenged by the language and the ideas. But who would you like to take along? Who do you think could maybe do with seeing a play like this?
Yeah. Well, I think anyone who has questions about life and faith, it's a good play to challenge you to think. But I think also for those who say they've got all the answers, it's a good play to shake us out of our complacency and maybe think about things a little deeper. I love reading the author's introduction to the play, and he quotes Thomas Merton, who said, to be a saint is to be yourself. And I think quite deliberately, Gerges tried to show the saints as real people.
Mm-hmm.
And for him, that was his time and place. And you can see an almost New Yorkian characterization, particularly to Saint Monica, but talking like a person of the street.
Yes.
Talking like a real person.
Mm-hmm.
Struggling with the things that real people, and I think, particularly in our history, saints have been painted and portrayed as being these
otherworldly almost.
icons of perfect, which simply wasn't the case. Even Saint Peter, when we read the Bible, he's a bit of a hothead.
Yes.
So I have no issue with the saints being portrayed as I don't want to say ordinary people, but
real
reflecting
people. Yeah.
what we see of ourselves. Because for all their complexity and all their brokenness, what is shown is that each of these complicated people gave a yes to God in their life, gave a yes to a relationship with Jesus. And that becomes, the mark of sainthood, not their behavior, not what they did, but their yes and their response, which then says to me, or anyone who goes to see the play, that this is a story about all of us.
Yeah.
This is a story, it doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, where you've been, how you talk, how you look, that there is something about ourselves and, our relationship with the divine that we need to answer, that we need to discover in this life.
Yeah. All righty. Well, we might wrap it up then. So final question, rating the play on a scale of 1 to 5. I'm guessing it's not going to get a 1, being pretty worthless, through to a 5, really impactful and an ingenious play. What would you give it?
Look, I'd probably give it a 4.
Mm-hmm.
I think the value of this play, it really does get you to think. Some of the challenges of the play, though, is it dates quite quickly.
Yeah.
Some of the references, and it's also quite culturally particular as well. I'd love to see an Australian performance of this, where perhaps we, with the author's permission, actually make it more relevant to our context and our experience. But that being said, I think most people can come away with being able to access the story and what's being presented.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Brendon, for taking the time to chat with me and for the effort you put into your background. It's great. And I'm sure a lot of people who have listened will be inspired maybe to seek out a production to go see, to read the book, or like me, watch it on YouTube. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Mandy.
All right, bye.